I'm JP at the Boardroom Game Cafe, and you're watching The Game Code. Whoa!
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am here with the one, the only Greg Sewart, not Stewart, as the last take just did. I don't even care. I'm going to throw that in there. How you doing, sir?
Good, thanks.
Good, excellent. It's only about the third time I had to ask you that today. I have such a long list here in front of me on the great accomplishments that you've managed to put together. So I'm not even going to bother to try and do this off the top of my head. I'm going to read them out. You are a veteran of the gaming industry, so to speak. You have been through a lot in the last 10 years. You've freelanced for places such as Electronic Gaming Monthly. Some people might have seen that before. G4 TV's X-Play. Some people probably have also seen that once or twice. Game Trailers, which is also relatively well known, and more. Now you're the producer at Frontier Developments here in Halifax.
Yep.
That is a pretty storied gaming history, sir. So how did you manage to get into the whole freelancing gig and get that whole thing started to begin with?
I actually, back in the mid-90s, after I got out of high school, just that I'm old, me and a couple of friends actually started a website that you've also probably heard of called Gaming Age.
Yes, absolutely.
Where NeoGAF came from. So we started that up in the mid-90s and just sort of got noticed. We did a bunch of work for free, basically just for the sake of being online and getting our names out there, and got noticed by Ziff Davis, and I actually landed a staff job at Ziff Davis for a little while, so I was at Electronic Gaming Monthly full-time at first until I came back to Halifax and started freelancing.
Okay, of course, because there's not a heck of a lot in Halifax to do except for freelance when it comes to the gaming gig. It's a bit of a tough thing to conquer. So, how do you think the industry has evolved since you've been in it? Now, you've been in it in a very interesting, actually before we started this interview, we were discussing a little bit almost as to what has happened just in the last 10 years alone. It has been quite a bumpy road, especially in the freelancing and editorial space. People's opinions of editors have drastically changed, for instance. But what have you seen change in the last 10 years, and how has the industry evolved?
The big thing that I've seen change, because when I got into it, print was still king. So it was still very much like a very month-to-month, you get the magazine, you pour over every page.
And you get that demo disc of Doom in there, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And so that was king, and then I sort of lived through the whole transition from print to the internet, and the differences now are huge. The editors all have voices now, and they're all actually personalities.
Absolutely.
Which back then you weren't. You weren't anonymous, but you were named on a page much more, and it was only once a month. Whereas now you're a daily personality, especially with social media like Twitter and Facebook and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, along the lines of also what we were talking a bit before, like with Gerstmann Gate and that whole thing, this plays directly into this. Is what do you think with the claims of, although I think anybody who's done even freelancing knows that this does happen to an extent, about the pressures from certain publishers and developers on publications for putting out good reviews and bribery, and what do you think about that? And do you think that's actually gone down since something like Gerstmann Gate, which was pretty much a big thing in the industry?
I think what's happened more is that it probably still happens a little bit, but you're probably right, it happens less. But I think the big thing that's happening now is that a lot of the publishers are actually hiring their own people, hiring their own community managers, or they're actually saying journalists. I think in this past little while there was another big publisher hiring an actual journalist.
Oh, wow.
So they're controlling the message more by hiring those writers and letting them be their connection to the fans. You look at something like Nintendo at this past E3, they were the big hit of E3 because they basically brought in all their Treehouse people and they did live streaming for the entire week.
Right.
So it took the media completely out of it. They got to control the message and show people what they wanted them to see. So I think it's kind of happening, but on a different level
in a different
now.
way.
Yeah.
So instead of worrying about it and throwing money at it to fix the problem,
Yeah.
they just kind of like cut the problem off entirely and
Exactly.
just take control of it. Yeah. I can see that for sure. Now, what is your role like in Frontier Developments? What exactly are you doing right now?
I'm a producer right now. One of the projects we're working on is Roller Coaster Tycoon 3, which is actually a game that came out about 10 years ago on PC, and it was a big hit for us. We're actually in the midst of taking that and porting it to tablets. So as a producer there, I do a little bit of design work, taking what was already there, especially in the user interface, and redesigning that from a mouse and keyboard interface to a touchscreen interface, which is a surprising amount of work, actually. But then, you know, as a producer, you're kind of jack of all trades. You make some of the decisions if there's sort of a stalemate between two people or two ideas. And it can be as important as like the actual art in the game, and it can be something as simple as making sure that if you have to work overtime, everybody's fed,
right?
So they don't have to stop working.
Crunch time.
Exactly.
Coffee, donuts, pizza, Chinese food, anything that you can do.
That's your job.
To keep the train moving, just everything at the same time. Now, can you tell us at all about any of the projects that you're currently working on, other than maybe that specifically?
Yeah, well, the big project right now for Frontier is Elite Dangerous, which was a huge kick. It was actually a Kickstarter. I think it was the first major Kickstarter campaign on the UK version of Kickstarter when it launched. But our company was launched based on the game Elite, which came out in the early 80s. Our president, David Braben, was one of the guys who created that game. And it was one of the very first full free-roaming open world, actually open universe games. And there were a couple sequels, but it's been something that David and the company have been wanting to do for years, is to create a new modern version of Elite. And so that's kind of what our whole company is focused on right now. And in Halifax, we did a bit of the work. We did a bit of the networking and things like that. But the game looks incredible. It just looks amazing. It's got like billions of stars. You can go to any of them.
What are this is not on the paper, but what are you guys using for an engine for it? Is this
it's our own engine.
Oh, it's your own engine?
Yes. Yeah,
oh, wow.
Frontier has its own engine.
That's even more impressive.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's from the ground up, Frontier.
Wow. Well, now I'm doubly as intrigued, because everybody's using Unity right now. I'm getting sick of hearing that word, and now, of course, it's also an Assassin's Creed game title. So I think there'd be some irony if they were also using Unity for that game, but c'est la vie, c'est la vie. Where can people find out more about Frontier Developments? Where can they go to check that out?
www.frontier.co.uk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? That's basically the sum total?
That's the sum total, yeah. Those are our two key projects. We are working on other things, but it's nothing that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Okay, okay. All right then, okay. So you are I'm going to say this lightly, as I might not be completely into it anymore, but a fellow YouTuber.
Yes.
You do some YouTube work. I'm sure you're having lots of fun with your latest copyright changes as they continue to move forward with killing everything and everyone in their path. Let's talk about Generation 16?
Generation 16.
So let's talk a little bit about that. For the viewers, and myself included, that haven't heard about it, what exactly is Generation 16?
So Generation 16, like I told you, I'm a child of the 70s. So I was a big fan of gaming from the late 70s on, and probably my favorite console was the Sega Genesis.
Okay.
And I find now lately on the internet, there's a big movement, retro gaming.
Absolutely.
Right, but it's very Nintendo-centric. So one of the things that I decided to do was set out and sort of try to look at the history of the Genesis, because to me it's one of the most important systems, especially in North America, because it sort of broke the stranglehold that Nintendo had on the market. And
Sega does what Nintendo don't.
Exactly.
You know what's up.
Exactly. That's what I like to hear. So the idea of the series is that I go game to game in chronological order, 5 games an episode, and each game kind of has a story, which is kind of cool. I do sort of short form reviews of the game, but also any trivia I can find, any background information on the companies or the designers, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're looking into, please tell me you've done Streets of Rage.
Haven't gotten there yet.
Oh!
I can't wait to get there.
Road Rash?
No, that's another one I can't wait for.
Okay, now you're hurting my soul.
Sorry.
Okay, you
I'm
started with
there.
Sonic, didn't you?
Come find me on YouTube, I'll get there.
Okay.
No, I haven't even got to Sonic yet.
Wow!
Altered Beast.
Okay,
Come
all right,
on.
now you're doing, okay. Well, I could appreciate it, So how did your passion for Sega, and I guess according to this piece of paper, the Mega Drive, which was, your cell, you got to show that off now.
Cell phone.
The Mega Drive of all things for the cell phone case. How did that come to be exactly? Was there a game that just happened to grab your attention on that?
Yeah, it was actually. Well, it was Super Monaco GP was the game that grabbed my attention. I know, it's so weird, right?
You've got some really out in left field picks. I love it. Okay, so that was the game. Why did that grab your attention?
Well, I'll tell you, the bigger thing is that I was a Nintendo kid,
right?
Like in a big way, NES, big Super Mario Brothers fan, and everything. Mega Man too. And I get Nintendo Power every month, and I was waiting for the Super Nintendo, and it just wasn't coming out. And this whole time, I'm reading like EGM and Video Games to Computer Entertainment, and they keep reviewing these Genesis games. It's like, I got to try this out. And there was this great store in Dartmouth called Game World in Burnside that rented the Genesis console with the games. So I begged my dad for the money for the deposit. Back then you had to put like a $300 deposit on something to rent a console. And I rented Super Monaco GP and Forgotten Worlds, and I never looked back.
That was it?
Like, I gotta have a Genesis.
That was the show.
Yeah.
That was the show. Well, you must have, tell me you've even kept up with some of the funky like Japanese commercials for the Genesis and everything.
Oh yeah.
Oh, those get good. 80% of the world's weird stuff comes from Japan, and it all started with the Genesis, baby. All right, so how did you manage to take all of that and then decide, did you just wake up one day and decide, I should probably put this on YouTube because that's the hip and cool thing to do? Or what exactly got you into doing that? Did you just want to share it with people and have other people enjoy it with you?
Kind of. I mean, like you said before, I was freelancing for 10 years or so,
Right.
and I really enjoy that. My first love is, I hate to say criticizing other people's work, but you know what, it's like talking about video
secretly
games.
likes to criticize just a little bit.
Exactly. So talking about video games.
Right.
And it felt to me like that wasn't something that was really being done for the Genesis, so I felt like that's something that I could bring to that space and get noticed, and it was just an excuse to play a bunch of old video games.
Which really, anytime you can manage that is a good time.
Exactly.
Indeed. So what was your, I'm gonna combine a couple of these here. You're gonna tell us real quick what your favorite review has been so far. Obviously we haven't done, the classics entirely. We haven't hit Streets of Rage or even Sonic. So what's your favorite review so far? And then where can people go to watch all of these fantastic bits?
Sure. My favorite review is actually a game that never came out. And a lot of people don't really know this, but Tetris was created for the Genesis, for the Mega Drive.
Okay.
But it never came out because there was this gigantic legal battle over the rights for Tetris between Nintendo and a company called Tengen back in the day. And one of the companies that got caught up in that was Sega, because they also had rights to the arcade version and to create a home version, which they did. There's some questions as to whether the game ever actually came out, but there's like 6 or 7 copies in the wild. They're worth a ridiculous amount of money. They're some of the most expensive video games you can buy. So what I did on my show was I actually did a big long timeline about from the origin of Tetris all the way up to present day, and where sort of Sega fit in on that. So it was probably my favorite thing to do on the show. I got a lot of praise for it.
That's a good game to go with for sure. It's weird because Tetris is literally, I think I just saw on Twitter, it's starting to get pretty meta where they've hacked Tetris onto a T-shirt now. Because you know how you start to get like those T-shirts that you could press buttons for like music and stuff? Well, now you can Tetris yourself while wearing it. That's pretty good. That's going to become a verb, Tetrising yourself. Although don't turn that into something non-kosher. So let's now move on a little bit to podcasting, which is obviously a lot of people that do the YouTube gig manage to kind of worm their way into podcasting eventually, especially when you're doing something like you're doing, which is a natural fit for podcasting. So you are doing a show called Player One Podcast, with now 400 podcasts. I don't know anybody who's never podcasted before. That's not an easy thing to come up with enough crap for 400 episodes of a podcast. Is no easy feat. So I commend you on that for sure. So what is it about, and why should, other than the fact that you get to talk about old video games, I'm assuming, should people tune in?
We actually talk about modern stuff too. So basically the way it was born was, again, back to the whole idea of criticizing games.
Of course.
Me and an old buddy of mine who also worked at Electronic Gaming Monthly named Chris Johnston back in 2006, we decided we're interesting. Why not?
Of course.
And we got an account on Libsyn, and we got our PlayStation 2 SOCOM headsets and plugged them into the computer.
Oh man.
And that was the first episode.
Oh,
we talked about Bully for the PlayStation 2. That was the entire first episode.
That's a good game.
Yeah.
That's a pretty solid game.
But since then, we've brought on another guy, Phil Theobald, who was also an old Ziff Davis guy, worked at EGM and a couple of magazines, and another guy named Mike Phillips, who was never a full-timer at those, but he's also done a lot of game reviews and things. So the reason, what I think we bring is that we're all older gentlemen. Pushing
forever
40
young.
or over 40. Yeah,
You're 40
we're
years
staying
young. That's what you are.
Yeah, but a lot of us, we've all been in the games media. We've all done game development. Some of us are still doing it, and we've all done the freelance thing. So we've seen different sides of the industry, and that's what we bring to our discussion. It's not just a game critic, it's also from a developer standpoint.
The industry stuff in
Yeah,
general. That's fantastic. I love that stuff. I already have too many podcasts to listen to, and like the Giant Bomb one is my core, and that's like 7.5 hours long at this point. So, it's so many hours, but I'm intrigued now. So where can people find out about this podcast, and where, when do you do it, and so on and so forth?
It's weekly, so we've gone, I think we've missed 2 weeks the entire time, so we've gone 400 weeks straight. Pretty much, and it's at player1podcast.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't even stress to you how insane that is. It's just absolute madness. For somebody who's done content for only 3 years now, 400 is just a crazy number to me. All right, well, guys, stay tuned, because coming up after the break, we are going to test our guests' knowledge with all sorts of weird and wonderful things. You know the drill. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.